Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
What is the most inexplicable and creepy thing that you have ever witnessed in person?
Weird UFO. Was out in the woods with some friends about to start a bonfire for a party we were throwing that night. Out of nowhere comes this loud humming sound. Honestly seemed like more a vibration than a sound. We start scrambling to put the fire out and get out of there, as we were kids with liquor at the time, thinking, we're fucked if this is cops or state game. The vibrating sound starts getting way more intense. As we're bailing, I look around and then up to see some bizarre shit. Hovering above the trees, maybe 5 or 10 feet above the crowns, was this thing. Could make out the exact shape of the craft. It was a little after dusk, but this was mostly due to being somewhat hypnotized by these 3 lava lamp-looking dome lights arranged triangularly on the bottom of the craft. They were lit up but didn't seem to cast light, or at least enough to light the trees up. The color was strange, seemed more like a strange thick liquid was inside them. A creamy beige-like color with highlights of green and purple. The craft was definitely no more than 30 to 40 feet across, made out an edge against the sky as I was looking up towards it. I want to say circular, but the whole thing took place in seconds. Looked up. WTF is that adrenaline-like time stop when seeing the thing directly into booking the fuck out of there.
Not exactly creepy, but certainly unexplained. Last year on the morning of September 12th, I woke before dawn and went outside to smoke. I noticed 2 bright stars that appeared to be planets. They were aligned north-south and about 90 degrees apart from my vantage point. They didn't fade as the sun rose. The southern one may have been Venus, but they were both moving west to east. I tracked them for hours until about 1 p.m. or so. I showed my family and they saw them. I texted friends and family and they all saw them. My cousin 1,000 miles away said he could see them. I took multiple pictures and tried to make reports on different sites and forums. Whatever they were, I saw 2 of them. They had to be incredibly high up, beyond Leo. And they were visible for hours in broad daylight.
Bumping with a weird hallucination story. Used to live in an old house, built circa 1910, with a lot of history to it. One night I was drifting off to sleep early and suddenly had the urge to sit up while I was in a hypnagogic state. I saw a woman in antiquated clothing pass from the kitchen into my bedroom and past my bed, making eye contact with me as she walked. She was very slim and moderately pretty, like the woman in pic related. This went on for about 2 or 3 seconds before she vanished from thin air. Probably the strangest thing I have ever witnessed. Looked a little bit like this, only with straighter hair, no jacket, and a more basic dress.
I've only had minor encounters. Lived across the street from a graveyard for about a year. Actually, would see orbs 2 to 3 times a week in my apartment. Day or night, in colors that were orange, green, or yellow. Never seen them anywhere else before or since. They didn't seem like they were haunting my place, but more like passing through. Also had an object dropped near me while urban exploring in an abandoned basketball court gymnasium. I heard a little tink sound behind me and saw it was the red nozzle of a spray paint can that bounced straight up and down in place several times. I was in the middle of the court with no one around me and the ceiling was about 40 feet up. Not exactly the spookiest story, but still not sure where it dropped from or how an odd-shaped object like that bounced in place multiple times.
I don't have many dessous, but I have this one stuck into my head. I was around 13 years old when that happened. I was staying late up night doing whatever on the computer when I suddenly heard my dad poking his finger at the door. My door was made out of really cheap wood and plexiglass, so just poking at it was sufficient enough to make a loud sound. I instantly moved my head to watch the door, expecting him to come in and yell at me for playing and shit at night, but I couldn't help but notice that the poking is not aggressive in any way, very slow, and with little to none force. Then, I gave a closer look to what's behind the door. The plexiglass had some kind of texture, so the view wasn't clear, but it was visible enough to see someone's silhouette. The problem was that there was no silhouette at all, but just a finger. It poked at the door 3 times and disappeared. Dad wasn't even home that day.
I have 2 brief ones, but I think they're related to something spooky in our family. Be my grandmother. From England, living in a small house in the country. Some place called Sandy. She's outside playing one day when she looks out into the field and sees a tall figure. It's walking briskly out in the open. It's white, but just barely translucent. Sunlight was making it glow. Has no arms at all, just some short legs and a very long torso. Almost as tall as the trees. Grandma watches it until it turns to look at her. It instantly disappears. She told this story often when my mom was growing up. Maintained to the day she died that it was 100% true. I heard her tell it a few times and she seemed genuine, for whatever that's worth. Also, Grandma's making breakfast one day. Turns around to get something. There's a black shadow of a man standing there. Grandma shrugs and keeps making breakfast. She used to see these shadow people all the time apparently. She said they never seemed evil and they never scared her. She just got the sense that they wanted to watch whatever she was doing. Mom used to see them too. Anyway, here are mine. Reading on my laptop one night. In the living room, sitting next to a big sofa. Very dimly lit. All lights were off except the one in the kitchen. Hear movement, like someone's adjusting themselves on the sofa. Look over and see the outline of a person sitting there. She disappears. I say she, because it felt like a woman. Can't explain that, but whatever. Last one. Driving home, after taking a walk out in this beautiful forest near my house. Small road. Serene. Suddenly hit by this powerful smell. Not bad, just really strong. Glance in my rear view. There's someone in my backseat. Only see them for an instant, because I hit the brakes and hop out of the car. There's nobody there. Normally I'm not quick to panic, but whoever I saw looked fucked up. Like they were covered in oil. There's other stories, but I'm going to bed.
I grew up in the sticks, no real cities or even decent towns anywhere close, so the local pastime for teenagers was just to get out and ride around looking for trouble, mudding, in trucks, etc. One night, me, my best friend, and our dates were out in his truck riding trails and stuff. We were up in an area he'd heard about that supposedly had an old abandoned mining camp, like a little ghost town out in the middle of the woods. We found it. It was creepy and cool as hell. A few little ramshackle houses, a couple of smallish buildings, and what looked like it must have been an old general store. Now I can't stress this part enough. This shit looked old by American standards, like it might have all been built back in the 1800s. The construction was all wood and stone, like those walls you see made of random-sized rocks. Most of it was all overgrown and falling in, but we got out and fucked around to see if we could find anything cool. My buddy's date was scared as shit, and within minutes of us starting to explore, she was wanting to leave. She kept saying that she felt like we shouldn't be there, that something wanted us to leave. Buddy ended up marrying this girl, by the way, and I can now vouch that she's legit psychic. But we are red-blooded teenage boys just poked fun at her for being scared. Then the howling started. We have coyotes, and what we heard at first sounded like them yipping at the moon, but it was a lot of them, and it sounded pretty close. Both of us had guns, because you don't fuck off in a woods without them, and my buddy fired off a round to try to scatter them and to make the girls feel less scared. All the yipping stopped, but then, way closer to us, we heard this deep ground trembling growl, so loud and so deep you could feel it in your own chest. And then it howled, all deep and throaty and musical, exactly like you'd expect to hear from a wolf, only there was this quality to it that made me think of a human voice. We were all good and creeped out by that point, so we get back in the truck to leave. On our way back out, we noticed something we'd missed on our way in. Off on our left back in the trees is an old graveyard, so old that the forest has basically reclaimed it, just crude gravestones sticking up amongst the undergrowth. My date shot her hand up to point at something, so carelessly scared she actually smacked me in the head in the act of just pointing.
Look at that dog.
I saw it then. Some of the tombstones had to be around 3 feet tall, especially the stone cross this thing was behind, but it was head and shoulders above it. It was so big that I thought it was a bear for a second, but I was pretty sure it had a tail. Then it did something that made me again think it was a bear for a second. It stood up. It was huge, easily 7 feet, I'd say. This all took place in the course of seconds. The truck's lights weren't directly on it, and no way in hell was I rolling down the window to try to spotlight it, but then it did something no bear really even can do. It came running and leaping toward the trail. I tell my buddy to go. And then we're hauling all the ass you can haul down a washed-out dirt trail in a woods. This thing's faster than us. We can get up to around 30 miles per hour at little stretches, but it's keeping pace. It's always behind us, just close enough that we can sort of make it out in the dim, red glow of the taillights. It's like it will get close enough to be seen, then just stop and stand there. This goes on for about 10 minutes of pure terror, then it's just gone. When we finally got back to my buddy's house, I mentioned that as scary as it all was, it didn't seem like it wanted to hurt us, just scare us off. That's when my buddy's girl said this.
Remember when I said something wanted us to leave?
Can now vouch that she's legit psychic.
She is, dude. She's not flashy about it, and sometimes I don't even think she's aware of what she's doing because the shit comes natural to her, but she does weird, unexplainable shit basically all the time. I've seen her reach for her phone before it starts ringing, and no, it's not that it's vibrating before the ring. My insane hearing can pick that up from the other end of my house. She has called my buddy in the middle of him dialing her multiple times because, in her own words, I felt like you were about to call me. I can be going through some shit, and next thing I know, my buddy's calling me because she's been telling him that she thinks I need to talk to him. My favorite is always going to be this. In July of 2001, we were having a big fourth party at their house and she was telling me about a dream she had. In it, she got up to go to work and realized there were no other people, no people at the gas station, no cars on the road, and her phone kept ringing. Every time, it was another person using the name of someone she knew was dead, relatives, celebrities, etc., calling to report an emergency. They'd always be confused because they thought they'd called 911. When she got to town, all the people had gathered to watch a demolition of the tallest building in town. That shit fucks with me to this day.
Living in apartment in city. Every few nights feel something walking on my bed, like a cat or small child. No pets in my home, all windows and doors closed so one can't sneak in. Assume it's just sleep paralysis and think nothing of it. Starts happening before I fall asleep or shortly after waking up, when I am still capable of moving. Still think it's just a trick of the mind. Fast forward a few weeks. New girlfriend is staying over, we are asleep in bed. She nudges me as I'm drifting off, in a scared voice she just whispers my name and says, "Do you feel that?"
Little footsteps around our feet. We both see slight indentations being made on the blanket, hear the mattress springs flexing. I say out loud, "Let us sleep please," and it stops. Girlfriend confirms next morning it was not a dream. This experience really opened me up to the paranormal. Before that I was a strong skeptic.
When I was 10 or 11, I was hunted through the woods by a humanoid made out of pure light. I was out on our standard yearly weekend trip with the Boy Scouts. That year, on the last night, they had prepared something special. Some kind of tunnel of horror thing along one of the more stable and visible paths in the wood. The idea was that some of the adults would wait at the end of it, some would stay back, and the children would all go one by one along the path and get spooked at bit. They hung up some lights so you wouldn't get lost, and put up some scares. Like, there was a big spooky spider hanging from the tree. At one point one of them was dressed up as a witch or some shit and would jump out of a bush. Harmless child scare stuff. I think I was about halfway through when I guess I felt something to my left. So, I turned left and way in the distance, I think a 100 meters away in the forest, stood a man made out of light. I didn't think much of it at first. I thought it was one of the adults dressed up in some weird suit to scare us, but A, I wondered why he would be so far away from the path, and B, the light looked too seamless to be some suit. So, I stood there and watched as that man walked through the woods, pretty much perpendicular to the path I was on. Then he suddenly stopped, and I could 100% feel as he turned his head towards me and looked at me. I was frozen in terror. It was like a wave of cold washed over my body. And then the motherfucker started running towards me. It was fucking weird. It felt like he was going extremely fast, but he still didn't manage to cover the relatively small 100-meter distance to me before I got the feeling in my body back and started running as fast as I could along the path. There were some more scares set up, but I of course ignored them all and kept running. I could still feel him follow me for a couple of moments, and then that feeling slowly started to fade away, but I kept running until I was at the end. I was about to tell the adults what I had seen, but I needed to catch my breath for a second, and while I did so I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of rational thinking. I thought that hey, it probably was just one of the adults who put a bit more of an effort into scaring us. So, I went up to them and I was like, "Hey, good job, the spider and witch weren't that scary, but the lightning man really got me." And I remember them looking really confused, and they started asking me questions about that lightning man. So I elaborated, and the look of confusion on their faces went, and they started to look really fucking concerned. One of them went to make a phone call, and we all went back to our campsite, where I noticed that at least one adult was always on watch throughout the night, looking over our tents. That's pretty much it. I never spoke of it to any of the other children, and I've never been back in any sort of forest since. I told the story a couple of times in my life, but of course, most people just tell me that I imagined things.
Mine's not great, but it's pretty weird nevertheless. I'm in the south of England and it was a very cold December morning in 2019. I had been out to somewhere that's about 10 miles away on my electric bike, setting out around 7 or 8 a.m. It was freezing cold and everything was adorned with a thick white frost. The landscape had a misty sort of wintry atmosphere to it that made it look very different. On the way back the sun had come out fully. It was a clear blue sky and there were quite a few people around in the nearest town. The frost was melting, and the ground was pretty much dry. I was on the straight main road that goes along a flat river plain from the nearest village to my town. The only wet patches were underneath the bare trees, where the frosticles had melted onto the ground. Then an apocalyptic-looking cloud suddenly started to form over just my town. I've never seen anything like it. As I got a little closer, hailstones started to fall, except they only fell under the trees, where the ground was already wet. The trees are spaced quite far apart, it's a hedgerow bordering a field. As I crested the hill and entered my town, it became incredibly cold, felt about -30°C. It was unbearable despite my heavy winter clothing intended for long journeys at negative temps. I have a suspicion that fairies might have been involved in this, but it could also be what they call a glitch in the matrix.
I have a few stories, but I doubt anyone wants to read them. Grew up poor, lived at grandma's house. My mom, me, my sister and my grandma slept in the same room. There was an old entrance to a chimney in the room that got rebuilt, but you could still see the shape of the fireplace. There was one bed and the other was against the other wall. I would wake up once to tiny little goblin men who were bothering me in my sleep. They did not pose any threat. They just seemed annoying. They were trying to climb onto my head, but I shook them off. I was lying next to my sister and I got up and laid in my grandma's bed right next to my mom and grandma. I saw them bugging my sister, but my sister was in a steadfast sleep so she wouldn't nudge. One time I had a night of heavy binge drinking. The next day I went to sleep. I woke up in my room with a cold chill up my spine. I turned around and saw a man sitting at the edge of my bed. I could not move. I could not shout. But the crazy part was, I knew I was asleep. I told myself to wake the fuck up, right now. He's going to take me if I don't wake up. Wake the fuck up. I woke up screaming that night. I still used to get visits by this entity. Even though I quit drinking a year ago. The last time, I fought back and got into a fistfight, but it felt so fucking surreal. I could taste my own blood. And the last time, the creepies. I was sleeping at my cousin's house until he woke up in the middle of the night to tell me there was a man standing in our room and my cousin said to not be alarmed. That he was always standing there every night. I did not sleep anymore. I just stayed up and that was also the last time I slept at my cousin's house. I figure out my cousin got molested by his dad or something. Because my cousin has psychopath tendencies. He'd torture animals. He'd hurt you without remorse or empathy. He was dumb as fuck and scared quickly of punishment. Last time I heard about him, he got bullied out of his dad's house. There was this one weird thing that happened to me when I was sleeping at a friend's house when I was maybe 9 years old. We were both asleep on the living room floor when I woke up to see the faint silhouette of my friend standing next to me. I was just lying there thinking why he woke me up in the middle of the night like that. But before I could ask him what he wanted, I could just barely see him gesturing at me to follow him. So, I got up and tried to follow him through the darkened, barely lit living room and over to the spare bedroom where his grandma was staying for the night. I was just standing there in the dark in front of where his grandma was sleeping, wondering why the fuck he led me over here at all. But when I turned to look at him and ask him what was going on, the vague silhouette of my friend just disappeared. I was really freaked out and didn't know what to do. But his grandma had started to wake up and so I just snuck back over to the living room. It was really weird because I could kind of see his silhouette. There was a light on in the kitchen next to the living room so it wasn't completely dark, but it was kind of indistinct. I could see the general outline of his head and shoulders and arms, but that was it. It also moved perfectly silently, and when I got back to the living room, I saw that my friend was still asleep in his sleeping bag.
Not really scary, but I've always been able to move around during sleep paralysis, which kind of fucks up the way I see reality sometimes, since I can't tell what is real and what's not if the paralysis is subtle enough. Laying on my side trying to sleep. Cat presses against my stomach and loafs up. Voices and whispers come from every direction. Hands and arms start reaching out from under me, pulling me into my mattress. Don't feel scared but instinctively grab onto the cat, which isn't bothered at all. Limbs keep trying to pull me but somehow holding onto the cat stops them from actually taking me. Cat starts purring. Feel it vibrate through my entire body. Limbs disappear. Cat yawns and stretches, walking away. Get up now that it's over. I don't have a cat. Sleeping pretty soundly, having a really odd dream. Wake up and I'm face to face with a shadow staring straight at me. The white dots in its eyes seeming to align with mine. Somehow I can tell it has a female form despite being in the dark. Attempt to move slowly but realize she has her hand over mine, as if holding it. Adjust my position as she follows my movements with her silent, peering gaze. Fall asleep without realizing. The rest of my family have experienced paranormal events. I only have my sleep paralysis shenanigans and a lot more synchronicities. One of my sleep paralysis experiences that made me question reality for a bit. Wake up feeling dehydrated. Get some water but feel like I'm floating as I walk. Drink water and feel actually pretty good now, if a little fogged up. Realize my mother is in the room she usually stays in when she visits. Walk in but she's just standing there unnaturally, moving a powered-off vacuum back and forth. Realize I might be dreaming since I feel no fear or discomfort, but feel confused because I'm not feeling lucid. Walk towards her, but it's something else that looks vaguely humanoid wearing a wig. I somehow know its clothes are just skin. It's just smiling while tracking my movements with its eyes, still moving the vacuum. Try to power the vacuum on but it's not plugged in. Tell it to plug it in next time and it smiles even wider as I walk out. Walk outside to see my yard. Some motherfucking stereotypical demon-looking guy is building walls around my property. Ask it what it's doing and he just says, "It's an egg." Walk back inside, looking around to see if I can spot anything else that's weird. Get fucking spooked by another one of those fucking things just sitting behind a stepladder. Tell it to put that shit back where it belongs. Thing smiles wide and stands up, walks away with the stepladder in hand. Realize I have a perfect opportunity. Walk into my room to see if I'm having a trippy ob. Silhouette of myself is just sitting in bed, can only see static defining my form. It seems to look up at me and lays down. Feel the weight of sleep paralysis and the release all at once as everything goes black. Wake up feeling dehydrated. I know it can easily be credited as a fucky dream, but it was very similar to other sleep paralysis events I had. I'm not even sure if it is sleep paralysis, I just assumed it was since it's been that way since I was a kid.
9 or 10 years old. Cousin always visits since I'm his only friend and vice versa. It was the middle of the afternoon, my parents were working so we were alone. Playing video. Here's some shit going down in the kitchen so we go check it out. The faucet was open. Close it and head back to my room. Shortly after we hear fucking footsteps just outside the room at the hall. The living room TV turns on the highest fucking volume possible. Too scared to move at this point. Eventually we decide to man up and run through the apartment and go to our grandma's house. And so we did. As I was locking the main building's door, I looked back at the direction of my apartment. Remember like it was yesterday seeing a little girl frowning, kind of hiding behind the corner of the wall. Had pale skin, short channel black hair, a little ribbon onto it, and she wore a cute little white dress. She looked sad but puts her palm up, as if saying hello. Freeze to my knees and run to Nana's place. A few years later I had another experience with whom I believe was the very same little girl. After that I dream about her from time to time. She never said a word in those dreams, but always smiles and plays about. She even gave me a flower once just before I woke up. Can say she is my second oldest friend. That is, if I'm not a schizo.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.